Welcome back to Moon and Magnolia's YouTube channel and kitchen. My name is Rebecca and I'm so glad that you are here. Today I'm sharing easy weeknight meals for any schedule. Weeknight cooking is unpredictable, at least for me it is. I never really know what the week has in store, and of course I never really know what the day has in store. So sometimes I have tons of space to make food and other times I have 10 or 15 minutes. So what I wanted to do today is share some recipes and ways of squeezing in scratch-made weeknight meals. First up on the weeknight menu is a slow cooker beef stroganoff, and I like to use slow cooker recipes 2 times really. One, when I know I'm going to be busy and out and about all day and I won't have time to be in the kitchen and cook, or 2, when I know my husband is going to be in the office and it's pure chaos in my house and I don't have the energy to cook by the end of the day. I use the Taylor proofing box and slow cooker. What I really like about this is that it's collapsible, so it's not some big appliance that I have to store. To use this, you just put the food in a stock pot or a Dutch oven and put it right into the proofing box, and it cooks it at 195 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the standard lowest setting on most slow cookers. I'll leave a link for this in the description box below. But slow cooker meals for me are really helpful on days when it's just my daughter and me at home because she is an only child, so I'm really her only playmate at home often, so I don't always want to be stuck in the kitchen cooking. So to make this, I am simply first just browning some stew beef and then deglazing the cast iron Dutch oven with a little bit of vinegar. I actually just posted a blog about deglazing cast iron. I'll leave a link for that in the description box below because you can totally deglaze cast iron. You just have to be a little particular how you do it. And then I'm adding in some pre-chopped onions and green peppers. Now I know green peppers are not a traditional beef stroganoff ingredient, but I have a ton of green peppers that I chopped up from my Sunday prep earlier in the week, and I don't like mushrooms, so I'm skipping that. And I just added in some fresh garlic that came straight out of my garden, which I'm super excited about. Then I am adding in some stone ground mustard, what I have left of the Worcestershire sauce, and cooking this just for like 3 or 4 minutes or so. And then I'm stirring in about a half a box of beef broth. I like to make my own broth. I almost always have homemade chicken broth on hand. I didn't have any homemade beef broth, but this would definitely be better if you have a homemade broth. But what makes weeknight cooking easier is to use what you have and to keep a well-stocked pantry. So if you have to run to the store and get a million things or put in Instacart order and wait 2 hours for the ingredients to come, that really complicates your weeknights. I did not have bone broth, so I'm just letting it go, but I do keep my pantry well stocked and keep a couple boxes of broth on hand for busy nights. I'm getting the egg noodles going, and while that water starts to boil, I am getting the sauce ready. So I'm using the remainder of the beef broth and a little bit of cornstarch to make a slurry. And then what I like about the Taylor proofing box as a slow cooker is I can take that Dutch oven out and put it on the stove and finish up my meal that way. You could definitely add this sauce into a slow cooker. It'll just take longer for it to thicken. With the Dutch oven on the stove, I can bring it to a boil and I'm adding in the slurry so that way it thickens faster because time is of the essence on a Monday night. So once the slurry's in, I'm bringing it to a boil and then I'm dropping it to a simmer for about 15 minutes or so, really however long it takes for the water to boil and for the egg noodles to cook. So in the morning, this recipe took me about 10 minutes to prepare. And part of the reason why that was so fast is because I had the onions and the peppers ready to go. So that's always helpful to have your ingredients prepared ahead of time. Then in the evening, this took me, I'd say maybe 15, maximum 20 minutes to finish up. So we're looking at between 20 and 30 minutes total of hands-on time for this meal, but that's broken up into 2 parts of the day. So this is really manageable, especially if you are making meals in the margins of your day because you're working all day or you have kids around, it's too hard to get things done. Making recipes like this makes it really manageable to have home cooked, scratch made food. For sure, you could make this with mushrooms, just add them in before you put it into the slow cooker. I just really don't like mushrooms, so I leave them out. And of course, this is stroganoff, so you top it with some sour cream, and then I added a little bit of freeze-dried parsley, and this was a delicious and easy meal. The next two recipes can definitely be made in one evening if you have the time and space, but the way I am making them and sharing them with you today presupposes that you have a few things prepared and on hand, such as broth, a chicken, whether it's one you made or a rotisserie chicken, and caramelized onions. So broth, chicken, and caramelized onions are some of my favorite things to keep on hand in my fridge at all times because they make life easy and delicious. So I'll share more about those ingredients as we move through these recipes. Earlier in the day, I pressure cooked a whole chicken and I used up some of the veggies that I had in my fridge just to make that stock. The chicken I'm going to use for one recipe and the broth I'll be using for a French onion soup that I'll share with you now. But here's the deal with the caramelized onions for the soup. I am making them the night before I plan on making soup for dinner. So caramelized onions are not super friendly for weeknight cooking because they take a while. They can take somewhere between like 30 and 45 minutes to truly get caramelized. The thing about weeknight cooking is that it doesn't have to happen on that weeknight. If you can fit in little pockets of time where you can caramelize some onions or chop some veggies and prep things in advance, it makes the meals down the road a lot easier. So once my daughter was finally down for bed and I had a pocket of quiet time, I made some caramelized onions to use later. And they basically just have to sweat in that pan for like 30 minutes. So that's also a really good time to read a book or watch a show too. So you're kind of killing two birds with one stone here. The next day, I am making French onion soup for dinner. So I'm putting the caramelized onions into a stock pot to warm up because of course they've been in the fridge. So I just put the temp on low and let them get warm. And then I stir in about 2 tablespoons or so of flour to help them thicken up that broth a little bit. I've made this recipe so many times I don't even measure, and that's really helpful for weeknight cooking, to rely on recipes that you don't even really have to think about. Here I'm adding in about 1/2 split of white wine and some sherry. Sherry is the French onion soup secret ingredient. It's what makes French onion soup taste like French onion soup. And then I am pouring in the broth. I'm actually straining it through first so the vegetables and any parts that cooked out of the chicken that you don't want in the broth get stuck in that strainer, and we have a delicious clear broth for our soup. And I also added in some bay leaves and a little thyme. Traditionally, a French onion soup would be made with beef broth, but even though I have boxed beef broth in the pantry, now I have this homemade chicken stock. So for busy weeknights when it's hard to squeeze meals in, I always use the most nutritious ingredients first. So that way, even if it isn't the fanciest thing I've ever made, it is at least the most nutritious thing I can make. I have a little bit of leftover sourdough maple oatmeal bread that was in the freezer. It was still a little frozen when I was cutting it, but I just put a little bit of olive oil on it and toasted it. But I'm also adding in some frozen cauliflower for some nutrition and a little more of that starchiness. So if you don't have any bread, or if that doesn't fit into your weeknight schedule, you can totally skip toasting the bread and just use the cauliflower. The bread is golden and toasted, so I'm putting it right on top of the soup with a little bit of shredded Swiss cheese. You could use Gruyere cheese too if that's what you have on hand. And then I am putting it under the broiler for just about 3 or 4 minutes until everything is toasty and melty and delicious. If I were to have made this in one sitting, it would have taken well over an hour to make. But because I had those onions ready to go and the ingredients on hand, I was able to have this on the table on a busy weeknight in about 20 minutes. The next recipe is for those nights when you have like 15 minutes to figure something out and feed hungry people. I am making a super simple chicken enchilada skillet meal. Again, I am relying on some prepared ingredients like pre-chopped onions and pre-chopped green peppers and the chicken that I pressure cooked 2 days ago. So I'm simply sauteing the peppers and onions until they are soft, adding in the chicken and cooking it until it is warm, and then mixing in a little bit of cumin and oregano, a can of enchilada sauce, and stirring it together. I added in a little water because I felt like it was a little thick, and let that cook down for like a minute. adding in a little bit of salsa, stirring it together, and that is it. Literally, this took me about 10 minutes. Now, slowing things down a little bit, I had to shred some cheese, which didn't really take that long, but if you pre-shred your cheese, that will save even more time. So then I just topped this with some shredded cheese, a little bit of sour cream, and I had some leftover tostadas that I crumbled up and put on top, and that was dinner. You could put this in a taco shell, roll it up in a burrito, throw it on a salad. It's so easy and versatile and perfect if you only have a few minutes. Sometimes I feel like the fastest way to get food in my family's body is to run through the Chick-fil-A drive-thru. But the reality is, even Chick-fil-A, who has the most efficient drive-thru I have ever seen, cannot prepare my food that fast. Last up on the weeknight menu is Salisbury steak, meatballs, and white rice. And I am making the meatballs in the Instant Pot. And I love the Instant Pot on busy weeknights because you can make just about anything in a matter of minutes and it's really easy to clean up. But I didn't love the way the meatballs turned out in the Instant Pot. So you could definitely make this in a pressure cooker if you have one, but I actually think a better solution would be to make this on the stove, and I don't think it would take that much longer. I think you'll see in a moment, but I think it's because the meatballs have to cook in a little bit of broth. They were just a little too soft for my liking. But nonetheless, I sauteed some chopped onions, the same chopped onions you've been seeing this entire video that I pre-chopped earlier in the week, and I just cooked them until they were translucent. Now, my Instant Pot overheats all the time. I don't know why. So as soon as they were translucent, I turned it off and finished the recipe and then turned it back on when it was time to cook again. Here I am just taking some ground beef and I am mixing in with it a little bit of breadcrumbs, an egg. I like to use tomato paste sometimes, but I didn't have any, but I did have some freeze-dried tomato powder, so I threw that in there in lieu of tomato paste. And I also added in some fresh garlic from our garden. So I grew garlic for the first time this year and it turned out great, but I did have a couple bulbs that were really small, so I am trying to use those up first. But just as a side note, if you want to grow some of your own food that is super easy to deal with, garlic is it. It was so easy. And now, months later, after doing nothing to it, I have fresh garlic in my kitchen that I'm cooking with. It's amazing. It's like magic. And then I am putting some of the onions into the meat mixture. So once that's all mixed in and ready to go, I'm forming them into meatballs. And I sauteed them first in the Instant Pot. But I think from here, if you were to make this or any meatball recipe in the Instant Pot, I would saute them in a cast iron skillet or just cook them in the oven. I think they'll turn out better that way. But as for the sauce, I have a few tablespoons of flour that I'm mixing together with a little bit of beef broth just to help thicken it up. And then I'm adding in a little bit more of that freeze-dried tomato powder. So these are sort of a tomatoey Salisbury steak meatball. It's a little bit different than a classic Salisbury steak. And again, that's because I really don't like mushrooms. So anytime a recipe has mushrooms as a main ingredient, I try to highlight something else. But you could definitely throw in some chopped mushrooms in the meatballs. The meatballs ended up being really crowded in the Instant Pot, and that was just with 1 pound of ground beef. So if you're doubling up on this, there's no way you'd be able to make those meatballs in there. So once I cooked them with the sauce, because that needs to be in there for the Instant Pot, they were a little bit mushy. They still tasted good. They were just mushy. I served them over some white rice with a little bit of the sauce. And it was good, but I think it would be better if you just made them in the skillet or in the oven. It might take a little bit longer, but I really don't think it would take that much longer. But weeknight cooking isn't about perfect meals. It's about just having meals. So this worked just fine. We were fed, we were happy, and we are grateful to have this food, even though that wasn't our number one favorite meal that I've ever made. One way to speed this up would be to skip the meatball part. So meatballs don't take a lot of effort, but they do add in a little bit of extra time. So you could just skip the meatballs, brown the meat, use all the same seasonings and flavors, and put that over rice with the sauce. That would be much more efficient, especially if you are in a pinch on a busy weeknight. I hope these recipes and tips gave you some inspiration for how you can make scratch-made food for yourself and for your family on weeknights. Weeknights. Thank you so much for stopping by today, and I'll see you again next time.